With that, let the debate begin. Our first questions go to Mr. Lantz and Mr. Redmond.
Opening statements?
Oh, my apologies. We should do opening statements first. That's right, I got to read my script correctly. We begin with opening statements, 1 minute each, a brief introduction, and we begin with Wade MacLauchlan. Mr. MacLauchlan.
Good evening, Wayne. Greetings and best wishes to my fellow party leaders and to the good people gathered here at P.E.I. and in the viewing audience. This is the 9th time that the four of us as party leaders have appeared together in the course of the election campaign. That is an historic record. Islanders have been impressed by the spirit of collegiality and dialogue. For me, it's good to be back on this stage where I served as moderator for the first Eastlink Guardian debate in 2003 and again in 2007. On May 4th, Prince Edward Islanders will answer the ultimate question posed by this election. Who will lead Prince Edward Island for the next 4 years? Our Liberal Party has put forward a substantive program built around 3 core commitments: people, prosperity, and engagement. We are committed to working with all islanders to make Prince Edward Island a better place. Our province is at an historic crossroads with a choice about how we move forward. Let me offer you my leadership and experience. Let's work together.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacLauchlan. Now to Progressive Conservative leader, Rob Lantz.
Thank you, Wayne, and good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen here this evening, and those of you at home. First of all, I want to thank the other party leaders for their time and effort throughout this campaign. Their commitment to democracy and to this province is to be applauded. We're only a few days away from the election now, and all 4 parties have made their case through one platform announcement after another as to what they will do if elected as your government. And the truth is, there's merit to all of them. What you, the voters, have to do is ask yourselves which party is the most likely to implement the ideas they've put forth during the last few weeks. Who will do what they say, and who will just say what you want them to say? Or to say it another way, who can you trust? I ask for your vote on May 4th to take this province in a new direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lantz. Now the Green Party leader, Peter Bevan-Baker.
There has never been an election like this before on Prince Edward Island. And no matter what the outcome on Monday, the political landscape will have changed forever. I am asking Islanders to match the courage of the fine candidates who are standing all over this island for the Green Party, and on Monday, to be bold and to be brave. When you walk into that ballot box, think not of what your parents and grandparents would like you to do. Rather, think of what your children and your grandchildren would like you to do. Take a deep breath, pick up the pencil, hold it firmly, and mark a decisive and bold X in a box not beside a red or blue color. We can do this. Indeed, I believe we will do this. And together, we will bring about a new day in island politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Mr. Bevan-Baker. Now to NDP leader, Mike Redmond. Mike.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and thank you obviously for the invitation here tonight to all of you who are in the audience. And this is actually mine and Peter's 11th debate, I believe. And we've certainly had a wonderful opportunity to go across the province. I do want to extend congratulations to Peter, to Rob, and to Wade, and to how this election has been handled. I think it's been in the utmost professionalism, and I think it's really important that we as political leaders put our best foot forward always and remain so. But I was reminded today of a speech by Robert Kennedy, and it talked about decency, and decency is at the heart of the matter. Kids going to school hungry is indecent. Seniors deciding between heating their homes and putting food on their table, that's indecent. Dialysis patients forced to travel to receive treatment, that is also indecent. It is time on Prince Edward Island that we had a government and a governance model focused on families, on our young people, our seniors, and our communities. Collaboration, cooperation amongst all parties for the benefit of all Islanders. Thank you.
And thank you very much to Mr. Redmond. Well, the surprise is out now, and who starts? All right, our first question of this evening, the one-on-one is between Mr. Lantz and Mr. Redmond. As I mentioned, it will then open up to all four leaders. And the question is, since we are here at the University of Prince Edward Island, it is only fitting that we begin with a question about post-secondary education. What is the biggest issue facing post-secondary education on Prince Edward Island, and what would your party do to address that issue? Mr. Lantz, Mr. Redmond, who's going to start us off?
Well, I think the issue is, the biggest issue is stable, long-term, predictable funding for the university, and I believe that the affordability of an education in Prince Edward Island is an important issue for students. And we talked at the CBC debate about how students access funds and how the terms on which they repay them. It's often the biggest investment that a student will make in their entire lives, and I think there needs to be better counseling for where students source those loans, better information about how they're to be paid back. We've come forward with our George Coles bursary. We've announced that we'll increase the George Coles bursary from $2,200 to $5,000 to encourage island students to stay here on Prince Edward Island and start their post-secondary education here. And we've also increased the incentive for the community volunteer bursary for students who volunteer at least 100 hours in their home community. So the affordability of an education and the stability of an institution like UP.E.I. is of utmost importance to post-secondary education here. We know that over the past several years, the financial position of the university has been not exactly in the most stable, and I think that it's incumbent upon us, a small province like this, to have such an important institution to make sure that its future is stable and can rely on predictable funding from the government.
Let's hear from Mr. Redmond.
Well, I think it's very important. Rob has raised a couple of very important issues, and we do talk about affordability, and capping tuition would be a very important move. We do need a sustainable, predictable model, and I had the opportunity to spend 12 wonderful years here at the university, and there's lots of issues around students going to school. One of the things that we need to get right to the heart of is that we need transparency in all of our models, and the university is not one of those that has exception. So we need freedom of information legislation. People in the province need to know how we are spending their dollars, and we know there's a considerable investment into the university. So not unlike our municipalities and the legislature, people need to know that the money that is invested in the university allows the young people to go to school. The other part is we need to focus on those individuals and young people who can't access post-secondary education for whatever the reason, and make sure that we find ways and grants and other means to get them into post-secondary education.
We can now open the debate between Mr. MacLauchlan and Mr. Bevan can now join the debate.
I might jump in there, if I may, Wayne, to say that I've got a lot of experience on the other side of the relationship that we're talking about here, and I totally agree, and in fact it was part of the students' advocacy in the lead up to this, that there be predictable multi-year funding for the University of Prince Edward Island as well as the college, and that's an important part of any relationship so that these institutions can plan. From the student point of view, where we see the main issue is on the back end, because there have been a number of programs put in place through bursaries and other awards and so on, but it's when students graduate that the student loan program needs to be made more flexible, and we've introduced several pieces there. One is to give a 12-month as opposed to 6-month period before payments start, and also to undertake a review in particular of the way in which eligibility requirements are affected by the parent income or the family income, as well as as income that the student may earn while working, while studying. So we're picking up directly on initiatives that the students have raised in that regard.
Mr.
Yeah, I think you'll probably hear a lot of uniformity in what we think needs to be done, because we all know what needs to be done. We do need predictable, long-term, stable funding for post-secondary institutions, and we do need to bring the university under the P.E.I legislation. I think all of us would agree with that. So really the question is, as Rob posed in his opening remarks, who will actually do what they say? Well, we've had two of the teams up here who have been representing government here for over 150 years, and I think we know what their track record on following through on their promises is. So I ask you to look somewhere else for the delivery of what we all know needs to be done.
It's an open debate, guys. Jump in.
Peter, I promise to deliver on everything that I promise. That's why I'm so careful with what I promise. So it's not. Don't look at my party's track record. Look at my track record. But let me say that the budget of the University of Prince Edward Island is roughly the budget of the city of Charlottetown, if I understand correctly. Now, I have promised and will do bring the university and all municipalities in Prince Edward Island under the P.E.I legislation. And I think, you know, there have been incidents here, questions of governance and how certain issues have been handled that the public deserves to have an insight into. And so P.E.I legislation is an important oversight that needs to be established here at the university. That's certainly important.
That's a terrific comment to make, Rob, but you didn't do it when you were at the City of Charlottetown. You were there, you're a councillor for 8 years, and you didn't have P.E.I. So the other part is...
I think you'll find, Mike, that I was always in support of the city coming under P.E.I legislation.
You know, it's great that you have an epiphany tonight. It's great that you have that epiphany.
Well,
anyways, can we also talk? We also talk about...
establish that very quickly.
Can we also talk about... I think I established the fact that you have no track record of putting P.E.I at City Hall in 8 years, so we can move on to that. But that's fine, okay? We also need to value our educators and our teachers and our professors at this university. And there is a move across this country to put more sessional teachers into schools and less commitment to our teachers. So that is something as a university we need to make sure that the kids that come to these schools get a quality education, a professional education, and leave here with a degree they can be proud of.
We have 1 minute left.
The other piece that is, of course, part of the picture here is to continue investing in the research endeavours in the university and how that supports the growth in the provincial economy. And the number of areas where we've seen some really important growth and future potential to really have great jobs here would be in the whole area of biosciences, in the area of the information technology and communications, and notably in the support that's been offered and will be provided for the development of the new engineering program and how that's going to tie in to the development of the provincial economy.
I've got 30 seconds left for Mr. Bevan-Baker.
There are other things that we could do to help students after they graduate with the burden of debt, and which is the reality of life. I have 4 children, and all of them were actually in post-secondary institutions simultaneously. We could, for example, forgive student loans by allowing the students to work in a community service job, and in so doing, forgive some of their loans. We could extend the grace period for the loans from 6 months to 1 year. All of these things are in our policy platform, by the way. And like was done in Nova Scotia, we could actually make all student loans interest-free. That was done in Nova Scotia. There's no reason why we can't do it here in Prince Edward Island also.
And I need to put an end to that question. Thank you all 4 gentlemen for your responses. We'll move on now to question number 2. And this debate will be between Mr. MacLauchlan and Mr. Lantz. No one issue came up more in the tweets and the emails and the Facebook postings that we received than the state of the province's finances. Both Liberal and progressive Conservative governments have only been able to balance the books in this province twice in the past 15 years. The island's net debt now stands at more than $2 billion. What is your plan to balance the books and start paying off P.E.I.'s debt? Mr. Lantz, Mr. MacLauchlan, who's going to start us off?
Well, we're going to start running the government like the people of Prince Edward Island run their households. And we're going to start by providing the Auditor General with the resources it needs so that we can do value for money audits on all Crown corporations and agencies. We're going to engage the frontline workers of this province because they know where the efficiencies are. We're going to find efficiencies. We're going to implement zero-based budgeting. We're going to build the budget from the ground up and make everyone justify every single line item of the budget. You know, we have a $1.6 billion budget here. You know, we will balance the budget within 24 months, but you know, you don't balance the budget by spending $58 million in unbudgeted spending in the 3 months running up to an election. There'll be no more $29 million parties. There'll be no more $29 million in loan write-offs over the past 6 years, only about a third of which had cabinet approval. Now if there ever was a way to steal money from government, there it is. There is no oversight, public oversight at all, to roughly $21 million that's been written off in loans over the past 6 years. We will establish a Royal Commission on Accountability in Government that will in fact investigate that practice.
Mr. MacLauchlan, jump in.
Let me answer your question, Wayne, which is how we intend to balance the books. Now, the first thing that any government has to do is take a look at its revenues and its expenditures. I've been finance minister for 2 months as well as premier, and we're not that far from balancing the books. We now have a deficit of $34.5 million, which is $5 million better than it was predicted to be. The public service in this province have been doing a fabulous job in moving along a path of fiscal responsibility, and by 2016-15 we'll have the books balanced. But let me say about the economy, which is really the issue here, which is what we can do to grow the economy of this province and to grow, in turn, the revenues of the province. But the main thing is to provide jobs and opportunities for Prince Edward Islanders. And the first thing that we think we can do, and we've laid out a program to do this, is to enhance our exports, the sales beyond the province, to enhance our purchases locally, to shrink our trade deficit, and that will take us on a course to grow the GDP of this province from about $5.8 million to $7 billion by 2020. And when we do that, we'll be reducing the debt to GDP ratio, we'll be in a position to balance the books, and we'll be in a position to pay down debt. But most of all, we'll be in a position to provide jobs and opportunities and growth to Prince Edward Islanders.
We are now bringing Mr. Redmond and Mr. Bevan-Baker into the debate.
Well, it's great that we talked about moving forward, and we're going to balance the budget, and we're going to look forward. But you know what? I've gone door to door in this province, and the single biggest question I get at every door is the Islanders want to know what happened to the PNP program. They want to know. They want to know what happened with the e-gaming. They want results, they want an inquiry. That is why the NDP announced a full judicial inquiry into $500 million in loans, $9 million in untendered IT contract, and then we moved to looking forward, a fiscal accountability office, independent of government. What's really important is that we assure Islanders that their money being used forward on a go-forward basis is protected. And Mr. Lantz talks about judicial inquiry, is the Royal Commission, and the AG. It's about politicians, again, policing politicians. It does not work. We need oversight like the parliamentary budget officer in Ottawa. These are real accountability measures. It takes the responsibility out of politicians' hands and puts it into the hands of an oversight that's independent. Thank you.
Well, there's a trend developing here tonight, and I think it's around plausibility. Mr. Sheridan promised balanced budgets from every year from 2008, 2009 to 2010, 2011 to 2012, 2000. Every year we were promised that a balanced budget was coming next year. And you're hearing from the two old parties tonight, that's okay, we didn't do it in the past, but just wait till next year, we'll do it next year. What we need is legislation to mandate balanced budgets, and that is in the Green Party platform.
It's not correct that there was a balanced budget promised in 2008, 2009. We were in a worldwide recession, and in fact, Prince Edward Island was the one province in Canada that didn't have a recession through that period, and it did so because we were, in fact, using infrastructure investments and deficit spending to help the province get through, and any economist worth his salt will tell you that that's what you have to do.
Well, we have deliberately given ourselves 24 months, and we think it's realistic. And, you know, we have to take into consideration that I'm sure we'll find surprises upon forming government. Does anyone in this room believe that the state of the province's finances are what we're led to believe? I don't think so. No. And Mike, listen, on the PNP issue, if you want answers on it, elect a PC government. We will establish the Royal Commission on accountability and governance. But listen, Mike, I promise you this. I promise you this. If you're still the leader of the NDP after this election, I will come to you. I will come to you for your recommendation on the 3 independent commissioners who will form the commission.
Rob, I will always remain a gentleman. As you've seen on Monday night, I'm a gentleman, so I won't take shots at you like that. But I will say this, sir. People want to know what happened with the PNP. And you know what? There's some big Tories involved there, too. So be careful what you say.
Mike, I think it's also worth mentioning that the Liberals would have been even further away from balancing the budget than they have been if they had not instituted the HST, something that was not at all discussed in the last election campaign. Without the money that they got from the feds for instituting HST, our provincial budget would be even worse than it is. An HST that was brought in, again, with no discussion during the election campaign at all, and done so on the backs of the low and middle-income islanders. It was shameful.
Mr. Lantz and Mr. MacLauchlan, and we'll wrap up.
Mike, I didn't mean to take a shot at you. What I intended to say was that I will consult with the leaders. I will consult with the leaders of all 3 parties on the independent commissioners who will form the Royal Commission on Accountability and Government.
Mike, since it was addressed to you.
Well, do you know what? When I went through the process to be the leader of the NDP, it wasn't about writing a $10,000 check to be able to run for office. It was about having the backing of the people of the province. Thank you.
Mr. MacLauchlan, you have the final 30 seconds if you want it.
Simply to say, Wayne, that I think people expect good government and accountable government, and we brought in measures that have not been brought in before to improve and enhance accountability in this province, and that includes...
Thank you very much. Well, it's amazing how quickly time flies. We already have 30 minutes down. We will continue our debate in just a moment. We are going to turn our attention to the #1 issue that was addressed in the Guardian's poll. That's coming up next. You're watching live coverage of Decision 15, the Leaders' Debate, live from the University of Prince Edward Island. We'll be back in just a moment. You are watching live coverage of Decision 15, the Leaders' Debate, live from the University of Prince Edward Island and across the region on Eastlink TV. Thank you for joining us this evening. And if you are watching from home or here in our live studio audience, you can take part in the discussion by going to the Guardian's website at www.theguardian.pe.ca, tweeting us at PEI Guardian, or on Facebook, facebook.com/PEI Guardian. The person who's monitoring all that traffic this evening is Guardian's web editor, Jocelyn Lloyd. Let's check in with Jocelyn now. Jocelyn.
Thanks, Wayne, and thank you, all of our readers who have been following along tonight and tagging us on Twitter and commenting on our website. I thought I'd share some of what you had to say on our website. Islander 1 wrote, I had hoped maybe Wade MacLauchlan would be different than Giz when Alec Campbell's name kept coming up, associated with Wade. But this is not how Alex Campbell premiered the island. Douglas wrote, Islanders deserve answers. The Premier must respond to the e-gaming corruption allegations. And what is being done to hold those responsible accountable? But Red Stuff responded, Liberals are going to win anyway. And then that was followed by several LOLs. Someone who identified themselves as amazed said, Tory candidates are rarely mentioned in any of the ridings. Olive Crane was elected as a leader by the majority with the promise to clean up the party. Olive was promptly thrown under the bus. The backroom boys are pulling the strings. And District 20 said, I'm voting green. Let's get the green tide going. On Twitter, here are some of the comments. One tweet said, now this is the kind of debate I want to see. Except for excessive hand-wagging. It's not an orchestra. So there's some feedback for some of our leaders there. Another tweeter observed, Peter Bevan-Baker was the only candidate to clap for all the other candidates. So they're watching you. And another tweet asked, what track record is Mr. Redmond referring to exactly? The NDP has had one seat in the legislature ever. Anyway, you are all invited to share your comments online on our story at www.theguardian.pe.ca. Post your comment, I'll moderate it and maybe read it later. And once again, our Twitter handles and on Facebook, just search for P.E.I. Guardian. Back to you, Wayne.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. And don't shoot the messenger. Remember, she's just reading the comments. Although I did notice when she was reading the comments, I had several people here pull out their phones. So we know they're taking part. So that is great. And great observations from those who are watching this evening. Please keep those comments coming. Well, it's time for the debate to continue. And we move on to question number 3. And that question will be open to Mr. Bevan-Baker and Mr. MacLauchlan. As I mentioned off the top, in the Guardian's Corporate Research Associates poll, Prince Edward Island residents who took part in that poll identified healthcare as the #1 priority. The island's healthcare system, like healthcare systems across the country, continues to struggle to provide services now. The challenge is only expected to get more difficult as the province's population ages. What steps do you and your party plan to take to ensure the healthcare system will be there for future generations? And we begin the debate with Mr. Bevan-Baker and Mr. MacLauchlan.
Well, like health itself, in healthcare we have acute and chronic problems. An acute problem in healthcare is access. We are actually performing fairly well compared to other provinces in some national standards, but in some others we're performing very poorly. So access to healthcare is a problem in some areas. Another acute problem here is wait times, and that's a real problem. Both of these can be solved only by hiring more frontline workers. There's no other way to do it. And not only that, but it has to be done in concert, excuse the conducting, in concert with having the right facilities and the right equipment. At the moment, we have a mismarriage of the equipment that's available and the people there to use it. And consequently, we have inefficiencies and we have ineffective use of people and of human resources and of the materials themselves. In terms of long-term, because the question was, how can we ensure that our healthcare system is there for our children? Well, we need to do some very profoundly different things. We have to recognize that the profound impactors on health are economic, they're social, and they're environmental. And until we relieve poverty on Prince Edward Island, until we improve the quality of the air and the water and grow safe, healthy, and sustainably produced food here, then we're not really getting to the root of what the long-term chronic problems here are when it comes to health. So there are acute problems, chronic problems, and as far as the chronic ones are concerned, we have to get away from the reactive kind of treatment-based healthcare to proactive wellness promotion, preventative health. That's how we'll really save money in the long term in the health system.
Mr. MacLauchlan.
We totally agree, for starters, with the Guardian people who took part in that poll and put healthcare right at the top of our platform, and substantially agree with what Peter Bevan-Baker has said about it. We do have to reduce wait times, and we introduced a number of measures there, in particular to do with cataract, hip, and knee surgery. But the biggest effort, and about 5 of our 6 initiatives in our program, are directed at early attention, preventative health, and primary care. The work that can be done by community pharmacists, by paramedics, and by a doubling of the number of nurse practitioners. I'll mention one other area because, of course, the time is limited to discuss such a vast topic, but across the board, the area where significant investments have been made is in pharmaceuticals and to give people better access. So there's been a catastrophic drug program with now almost 250 drugs listed, enhanced access to generic drugs, and in particular particular on this one, we have introduced a P.E.I. first in Canada generic drug program, which will enable the third of islanders that don't have drug coverage to have capped access to generic drugs and to be able to fill their prescriptions and take them on a timely basis. And we believe that that will not only provide a financial assistance and financial stability to those people and their families, but it will in fact enable them to have better health at an earlier stage so that they don't become acute problems later.
All right, let's open the debate to everyone on the stage. Mr. Redmond.
Well, it's a wonderful issue, and certainly profoundly affects all islanders. And I did have the opportunity in the past 3 years to attend not one but 7 healthcare meetings across the province. And certainly what we got from every one of those communities was the fact that government had not engaged those communities in a healthcare debate. So that's why when I have conversations with my friend Nathan Bushy, who's running for us in District 2, that a man should have to fight for dialysis service with government is absolutely shameful. That's why we talked about putting in a governance model that works across Prince Edward Island. That's why we talked about engaging all of our communities in the healthcare accord. And that's why we talk a lot, and Peter's already mentioned this, the social determinants of health. I will say this, though. Mr. MacLauchlan talks about the catastrophic drug plan, but you reverse first payer on medical insurance for retirees. So you burdened retirees with medical insurance payments that doubled. So some retirees are now paying $600 when they were paying $300. We tried to balance the books on the back of those who are on fixed incomes. That's just completely unacceptable.
Mr. Lantz.
Well, I heard Mike talk about consultation, and with regard to the generic drug plan, pharmacists will tell you that there was no consultation, and they can point out many of the flaws in that plan. Generic drugs are already some of the cheapest in the formulary, and the problem is when we start covering some of these drugs, then the private insurance providers start dropping them for those that are covered, because if the province is paying for them already, then they just give up on it themselves. But the problem with our healthcare system here is the infrastructure we have is in place, was put in place for an entirely different model of care, not in place for the modern types of health problems we have now, and we haven't adapted our infrastructure and our business processes to modern health problems. And Peter talked about putting more resources into the system, but we can certainly use the resources we have much more efficiently. We need to examine the scope of practice for all of our healthcare professionals. And, islanders don't care who delivers the service. They just want health care when they need it, where they need it. Our hospitals are full of people that don't need to be there. We have seniors waiting for long-term care. We have people getting hip and total knee replacements who are spending up to 3 times longer in hospital in this jurisdiction than they are in others. And simple changes to the system, like expanding the home care model so that occupational therapists and physical therapists can meet patients at their homes after they are discharged from surgery, rather than having inpatient service at the hospital, which keeps them in beds far, far longer than they need to be. So, this is a business process problem. We need to address it like a business process problem.
We have less than a minute left.
I think it must be mentioned that we cannot have a discussion about healthcare if we don't talk about mental health here on Prince Edward Island, an enormously we need a system which has 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week access for emergency mental health situations. When people are suicidal, they need access then and there, and there is nowhere to turn here on Prince Edward Island. Not only that, we need to help people to become well, but also to stay well. And that's going to require a collaborative approach between not only psychologists, but life coaches and dietitians and social workers and nurses, a team approach to make sure that we don't just send these people back into their own community again, where almost inevitably the problems will recur.
The last 15 seconds to Mr. MacLauchlan.
Two quick points, Mike. First on the point about advice getting through to Health P.E.I. We've undertaken to set up county-based advisory councils for that very purpose. On the comment that was made about private insurers dropping people because of this generic drug program, let me repeat, this is for people who don't have private insurance, and it's going to cut the cost in half and enable them to get their prescriptions filled.
Let's end the debate at that stage. We need to move on. Let's move on now to question number 4 and this will be between Mr. Lantz and Mr. Bevan-Baker. And we're going to stay in the healthcare field for just a moment. Access to on-island abortion services have been passionately debated for years in this province. Still, island women have to travel off-island for services, the only province in Canada to do so. Will your government commit to providing on-island abortion services? Mr. Lantz, Mr. Bevan-Baker.
Yes.
Thank you, Wayne. And our party's position hasn't changed. We respect the laws of Canada. We respect the principles of the Health Act, and we will abide by those. And it is changes to the current policies are not considered in our agenda right now.
I want to make it clear that when we're talking about women's health, we're not just talking about abortions. We're talking about postpartum depression. We're talking about infertility issues and a whole other range of problems. Unfortunately, the discussion never gets past abortion, and that's a terrible shame. It's a terrible injustice to women. The last all-leaders debate, which happened in this very hall 4 years ago, I remember it well. I was standing at the back. Every single one of the parties on this stage committed to including midwifery under our health care. It has not happened. We all know it needs to be done. We're getting back to plausibility again. We absolutely must have midwives and other adjunctive health experts in our healthcare system.
It's still open between Mr. Lantz and Mr. Bevan-Baker for another minute.
Well, thank you, Wayne. And we are committed to women's health issues on Prince Edward Island. We are, there are a broad range of services that can be improved on here as well. There are...
I'll help you out here, Rob.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, because I think I've made my party's position clear, and that's the position that we'll finish this campaign on, and that's the position that we will govern with.
Just to close it off, there are 4 parties represented in front of you today. None of us is telling you that we're going to prevent abortions from happening. 2 of us are saying, yes, you can carry on doing that, but we're going to make it difficult. We're going to discriminate against women of low and middle income, and we're going to put unimaginable barriers in their way to do that. The other 2 parties are saying that is not acceptable.
Okay, we're now going to open... The debate is now open to all 4 leaders, and I think Mr. Redmond's hand is up.
Let's just talk about, if we're really up here and we're talking about changing the dynamics in this province, then we need progressive leadership. Right? We don't need leadership that says the status quo is okay. It's not okay. This is a fundamental human right we're talking about tonight. We're talking about something that's protected by the Canadian Health Act. You guys need to have the courage to stand up and stand for women in this province. End of story.
Mr. MacLauchlan.
Abortion is a legal medical procedure under the Canada Health Act and under the Constitution, and when the Morgan-Tyler decision in 1988 struck down the provisions at the time, it was because all of the procedures were too cumbersome. So our position is that there are 3 areas that we will address. One is the availability and the timely availability of information. The second is to look in consultation with the community at the preliminary requirements that are now in place, notably the requirement of having a doctor referral and having a family physician involved, which that we recognize as potential barrier and may not be necessary, in fact, because should be open to reform. And the third is the out-of-pocket cost for women who are having out-of-province abortions, and we're prepared to support that. So that's really where we're coming at this. It's not status quo, it's to address the issues of access.
It's status quo. It's status quo. It's simply status quo. And listen, we had a harsh winter, although it was short, and we had women who were scheduled to go to off-island abortions who could not access. So they were not available, Mr. MacLauchlan. That's the problem. The bridge wasn't open. The roads weren't open. So what happens to that appointment? So again, we need to have politicians who have the courage to stand up for the women in this province.
as you all know, this is the 10th debate that we have had with all 4 leaders, and we've covered, oh my gosh, I couldn't tell you how many topics, 40, 50, 60, 70. I have had emails on all manner of things, but the most email I have had is on this topic of abortion. It's obviously an incredibly divisive issue. I think there are some insoluble positions which just cannot be accommodated, but we do, as Mike just said, we have to comply with the law here, and we cannot carry on putting bureaucratic and economic barriers in front of women on Prince Edward Island.
We still have about a minute and a half left. Anyone else want to add to the debate, or do we move on? Okay, we will move on to question number 5. This question will be between Mr. MacLauchlan and Mr. Lantz. The Canadian Oxford Dictionary defines trust as having faith or confidence in the loyalty, veracity, reliability, and strength of person. Through successive government decisions from Polar Foods to PNP to e-gaming, island voters are telling us they have lost trust in their governments. What are you prepared to do to restore trust and accountability in government? And the first one-on-one, as we said, is between Mr. MacLauchlan and Mr. Lantz. Who's going to start us off?
Wayne, as Premier, I've already put in place more accountability measures than have been in place under any previous government. And let me enumerate those. Their conflict of interest requirements and post-employment restrictions on senior officials and political advisors. Their greater transparency and disclosure on expenses by senior people. And it's to introduce a commissioner of ethics and integrity to work across the public service so that we can together have a greater confidence and greater capacity to have good government. And it's not because we think that the current government we have is wrong, but that you have to be constantly, and it's the nature of government to always want to get better and to learn and to improve, and that's exactly what we're committed to. And let me say, we're also prepared, and I've indicated this, to bring in whistleblower policy that would enable public servants to make complaints and to speak and to affect the ultimate function of a good public service is to speak truth to power, and we're totally in favor of that. So let me say that a government that I lead will offer Prince Edward Island real change from the red or blue governments of the past, and I'll demand real accountability as we continue to seek further improvements.
Mr. Lantz, jump in anytime.
Well, everyone here knows that I've been talking about accountability since the beginning of my leadership campaign, and I've heard it from tip to tip in Prince Edward Island. It is the #1 issue I've heard, in fact, that people have lost trust in government and those that govern them. And they have no faith that they're governing for the common good of this province. They feel that the government operates in secrecy, that it wastes their taxpayers' dollars. So we've come up with what I am confident is the most comprehensive accountability package of any party standing on this platform. For starters, all of my candidates have signed an accountability pledge, and I expect that they will be held to that standard throughout our terms in government. We will establish mandate letters. Each minister will receive one outlining the Premier's portfolio expectations for his departments, or his or her departments. Letters will be published online so that the public knows what those expectations are. We'll lead by example. There'll be no more blank checks in the form of government credit cards. No more cars paid for by taxpayers. We'll post all expenses online monthly. It's like a rabbit's warren trying to find out where expenses are posted currently on the government's website. There'll be tougher conflict of interest guidelines. We'll introduce whistleblower legislation, not policy. There's countless policies in government that never get followed because they don't need to be. We'll introduce a lobbyist registry. Will publicly disclose all government loans, grants, and write-offs. There's a start. Public money, public transparency. That's what we're committed to. I am absolutely confident that we have the the best accountability platform here, and this is a signature issue for me. Someday, I'd like to be able to walk away from public office with my integrity intact. I just feel that there are systematic problems with government that need to be resolved because it's like a trap waiting to snatch your leg off. So this is important to me.
The debate is now open to all 4 leaders. Go ahead.
Could I pick up on that, Wayne? Because we actually have brought in disclosure of expenses. We've brought in the conflict of interest requirements, and we're bringing in whistleblower policy. But let me say, because Mr. Lantz started out by saying from the beginning of my campaign, from the beginning of my leadership campaign, we disclosed all of our donations and expenses. And there was a similar undertaking made, but maybe Mr. Lantz can explain to us how that was ultimately fulfilled.
I don't understand the question.
The disclosure of the donations and the expenses to the Conservative leadership campaign, it took about 3 or 4 weeks after the campaign, and the way it was ultimately disclosed was fudged.
Mr. MacLauchlan, your leadership campaign was over before it began. We had a competitive race. It took a while. I was trying to win a leadership race.
Okay, Mr.
You haven't answered the question.
Listen, aren't you Islanders tired of this back and forth? Aren't you tired of the bickering between the 2 old parties? Aren't you looking for something new? Yes, you are. I know you are. Here's the thing we need to look at. An independent judicial inquiry, you know it needs to happen. We need to restore trust in government. We need to make sure our institutions are trustworthy, and this is not happening. You know you're getting the message at the doors, guys. Let's join together tonight. Let's commit to all Islanders. We're going to open up a PNP investigation, e-gaming, right now, tonight.
It's an open debate, guys.
Well, I'm going to try to repeat this for the last time. I've already promised an independent inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act into the PNP, e-gaming, and the government's lending and loan write-off practices. And I promise you, Mike, I'm going to come to you for your advice on who those independent commissioners will be, and to Peter and to Wade.
I think Islanders, as I said the other night, are looking for a couple of very simple and very reasonable things from their politicians. They want good, honest government from good, honest people. And we should not require stringent legislation to make that happen. Wouldn't it be nice if we elected people who were naturally and spontaneously behaved with integrity and competence? That's what we need to do. Forget the legislation. Just elect some people who can actually behave with integrity for a change.
Can I pick up on Peter's point, because I totally agree with it, and to say that the two key institutions that of our democracy are the legislature and the public service, and that's where we've turned our attention in terms of building greater openness and transparency and accountability.
Wait.
Mr. Redmond.
We cannot restore trust in our people when we have a 4-page Globe and Mail story that talks about the Liberal and Tory political patronage back and forth. We've lost the trust of the people. We have to answer those questions. It is the single biggest issue at the door, bar none. How do we get there? Let's work together, guys. Let's collaborate, cooperate, and find a way that we can restore trust in our communities. Come on.
We still have a minute and a half.
Sure, I absolutely believe in that, Mike. I think it's a sad situation we found ourselves in. The attitude, the perception that the public has of those who govern us. We need atonement. We need reconciliation. We need answers. We need trust reestablished with the people of Prince Edward Island. We have to do whatever we need to do to accomplish that.
I think one issue which has actually not come up at all in any of the previous debates is the election financing rules. There are 4 parties in front of you. 3 of those parties accept corporate donations. That in itself lends itself to at least the possibility of some shady behavior. Corporations should never be allowed to contribute to political parties. It just shouldn't happen. They don't vote. All election finances need to be changed here on Prince Edward Island, and a Green government would look almost immediately at the Election Financing Act.
We have less than a minute left.
Can I pick up the, because it's exactly what I said about looking to the legislature as the place where we should be building and reinforcing engagement and the principles of democracy. So between this election and the next one, there's to be a redrawing of the boundaries. And what I've undertaken is that shortly after the election, there will be an election, a whole electoral process commission that will look into a whole range of issues that have to do with effective elections and the way in which we can have the strongest possible legislature. And I would see that the whole question of financing of elections is obviously one that we would want to hear from the people on and look at the best practices in other jurisdictions. And if there's room for reform, then we should absolutely undertake it and move forward.
All right.
Great.
Thank you all, gentlemen. Right on the 5-minute mark. You're right on time this evening. Thank you very much. We do have to take another break, but before we do that, let me remind you that we would like to hear what you think about what's happening here tonight and what the leaders have to say. Get on Twitter, Facebook, or The Guardian's website at www.theguardian.pe.ca. Our web editor, Jocelyn Lloyd, is poring over all of your comments now, and we'll check in with her in just a moment. You are watching live coverage of Decision 15, the Leaders' Debate, live from the University of Prince Edward Island. We'll be back in just a moment. Live from the University of Prince Edward Island, good evening. I'm Wayne Thibodeau. You're watching Decision 15, the Leaders' Debate. I should mention for those who are here, or maybe you want to catch us again, the entire debate will be rebroadcast on Eastlink TV Saturday, May 2nd at 2 p.m. and nationally rebroadcast dates on CPAC Saturday night at 6:30 Atlantic and again Sunday at 8 p.m. Atlantic time. In a moment, we're going to turn our attention to environmental issues. But first, I want to turn our attention to you and what you have to say about our debate this evening. Let's check in again with Jocelyn Lloyd at the iDesk. Jocelyn.
Thanks, Wayne, and thanks again to all of our readers. Our Guardian readers are always opinionated, and they didn't disappoint tonight either. We've got some comments on www.theguardian.pe.ca, so keep those comments coming. MM wrote, or maybe it's what about the people on welfare? Is there a reason that we keep giving them money and they never have to get jobs or try? Yet the average middle-income family with 2 pays coming in can hardly make it, and they ask for help. Another Wayne, not our Wayne, said, might as well get over it, Rob Lantz, and name the party the Conservative Party of P.E.I. It's a pure reflection of Stephen Harper. And Big Red asked, what did the Tories do to help the lobster fishermen when the Binns government made millionaires out of the backroom supporters? One of our Twitter followers said, exceptional debate you have put together. And then there were a couple of those hand-clapping emojis, and it wasn't my mom. And then this tweet said, great debate so far. This format allows for a lot of excitement. And I have to agree with that one. On Facebook, we've got a few messages. These guys keep talking about job creation, but what about the seasonal worker who works long hours and gets overtime pay after 55 hours? A regular work week for government is 37 to 40 hours a week. Why not lower the overtime hours from 55 to 40 or even 44? Another Facebook follower said, watching the debate tonight, and Rob Lantz seems like he isn't prepared to read the speech that was written for him. And I also don't like his attack on the NDP. Remember, these are our Facebook followers, not us. Another follower said, it would be nice to hear the leaders' stances on LGBT issues on the island. A number of our commenters online, as well as Facebook and Twitter, expressed disappointment that they can't see the debate streamed online, but they're enjoying following along on Twitter and Facebook and on our Guardian website. So keep your comments coming at www.theguardian.pe.ca and tag us on Facebook and on Twitter at PEI Guardian. Back to you, Wayne.
Well, thank you very much, and a round of applause for our web editor, Jocelyn Lloyd. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Jocelyn is the brains behind the Guardian's website, and she wakes you up each and every morning at 6 a.m. So if you want to know the latest news, weather, and sports from Prince Edward Island, she is online at 6 a.m. every morning on the Guardian's website at www.theguardian.pe.ca. Well, it's time to return now to the debate. and question number 6. And our first one-on-one, or the one-on-one, is between Mr. Bevan-Baker and Mr. Redmond. And as we said, we are very appropriately talking about the environment. A legislative committee has recommended a 12-year moratorium on deep water wells be maintained. Many of the island's potato growers and one of the island's largest employers, Cavendish Farms, is calling for an expansion in the number of deep water wells in the province. If elected, will your government lift the moratorium on deep water wells? Mr. Redmond, Mr. Bevan-Baker, who's going to start us off?
Peter, please. Collaboration.
No, of course we won't. At depth, this issue is about how we want to structure our agricultural sector into the future. Over the last 40, 50, 60 years, agriculture around the world has transformed into an industrial model where we have produced a large acreage of a small number of crops. And that sort of specialization and intensification of crops has produced many problems. It's certainly increased the yield in some instances. But Prince Edward Island is uniquely unsuited to this sort of agricultural development. There are single operations in Idaho that produce more potatoes than we do on the whole island here. And what Cavendish Farms is asking the government of Prince Edward Island to do is, in a vain attempt to compete with something that we will never be able to do, to risk the future supply of water to all islanders. It's crazy. We just must not do this. You will hear from some people tonight, I would imagine, that the science suggests that this is something that we might be able to do. But I would like to suggest to you that the science we have at the moment is incomplete, that it's not peer-reviewed, and in no way do we have sufficient evidence to at all risk our water supplies here. We have to adopt the precautionary principle. We can't double down and make things even worse than they already are. But we can transform our agriculture into something that can really provide returns for the hardworking farmers, that can produce healthy, sustainable food, and that can protect the land.
Mr. Redmond.
Well, you'll hardly get a debate from me and Peter on this issue, and you know, I did have the opportunity, as did Peter, to present to the Standing Committee on high-capacity wells, and the information was overwhelming. I don't even know why we need to go back into the community, because those people that presented that day, from the Salmon Federation to environmental groups, all were uniquely agreeable that this is just not a good idea. The precautionary principles should stay intact, and we should make sure that the high-capacity wells moratorium does not get lifted. We also need to make sure that we always pay attention to the environment. At first, do no harm. So the other thing that we're exposing ourselves is our cottage owners, our farmers, you know, our inshore fishers, right, and our communities. And our water is so fundamentally important. No water, no life. And it's just not something we should even entertain. Thank you.
The debate is now open to all four leaders.
Well, it would be foolish, absolutely, to endanger our groundwater, which is our only source of drinking water on Prince Edward Island. And I have never seen any science on this, but if there is an ounce of science produced, it needs to be irrefutable, it needs to be reproducible, peer-reviewed science, and it needs to be beyond a question if we're even to consider lifting the moratorium. And I just don't think we're going to see that kind of science. Wayne, you did say off the bat in your question that many island farmers are supporting this. I have been on so many potato farms across this province over the past 5 months, and frankly, it is a small, tiny percentage of farmers that are advocating for this. In fact, most farmers tell me exactly what you're hearing here tonight, that it is not a good idea. And, you know, this is about productivity in our agricultural sector. There are other ways for us to focus on productivity in our agricultural sector, and one of those is soil quality. We've seen the quality of our soil degrade quite consistently over the past number of decades because of some of our farming practices, and I think we need to start there if productivity is really the issue. But I've also met farmers who have high-capacity wells, and I met a farmer who said, we get the perfect amount of rain here. This is a massive investment to get one of these things, but I haven't used it in 9 years. I've also spoken to a farmer who has a high-capacity well who irrigates and can barely tell the difference in size and quality of the potatoes he produces. So there are many, many questions here, but the bottom line is we will never endanger the quality of our groundwater here and our drinking water.
Mr. MacLauchlan.
I think there's a large degree of consensus here, but let me expand on that. We launched our environmental policy for our party at a potato farm where the farmers said that they had learned from their parents that they should leave the land in better state than they found it, and they're actually practicing that and working together with watershed groups and have expanded buffer zones and so on. On the question of the water itself, of course, we've got one aquifer, we're an island, and we all together have to be very, very careful about anything that happens that might endanger either the quality or the quantity of our water supply. But there is currently a process underway that will see the release of a white paper that will come shortly after an election. There will be an extensive consultation, and then based on the opinions and the input from the wide public and the best consideration of the science and the evidence, there will be a Water Act introduced, and it will be with the introduction of that Water Act that we'll be in a better position to address the question of whether there should or should not be further high-capacity wells. But let me just say, we currently have on the order of 250 high-capacity wells in the province, but 35 of them are on farms. So this is something that we've been doing, and we have to then go forward and have a full, careful consideration of the science, and I don't have any opposition to what I've heard said here about the precautionary principle.
Go ahead.
I think the question, Mr. MacLauchlan, is yes or no.
Let me if my mic works.
Sorry.
I think that's really gets at one's approach to governance. I mean, if we have to stand here on a stage on a night at the end of April in 2015 and say yes or no, and that's the way it's going to be forever, and we're not going to consider the science, and we're not going to have democracy, and we're not going to take account of the public opinion, then that's why we're going to have a consultation based on the white paper and you have to have.
Well, sorry, I'll let you go. I had the opportunity to go to all those standing committees, and I've had the opportunity to speak to some people like Daryl Guignon, and I've had the opportunity to sit down with Cassandra P.E.I. I don't need to be convinced. No.
We needn't be having this discussion at all. The future of agriculture on Prince Edward Island cannot carry on in the direction we've been going for the last 30 or 40 years. That is very, very clear. We have to get away from high-quantity, low-value commodities trying to compete with other places in this world in a global market which is getting increasingly competitive and at which we will always be at a disadvantage. We have to turn the disadvantages we have, our isolation, our small size, into advantages and turn our agricultural sector into high-quality, value-added, diverse products that we can do here on Prince Edward Island. We can build up the soil, farmers can make a good living, and we can produce products which are in demand.
30 seconds, anybody? Rob, Mr. Lantz.
Well, I agree in principle entirely with developing a Water Act for Prince Edward Island. I'm not sure why we need to wait until that act is in place. I'm not sure what exactly will be in this act that we need to wait for before making a decision on deep water wells. So I think this is something that people of Prince Edward Island are anxious about, and it's really the science we're waiting for, and I think we can proceed with this decision without the Water Act.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Without the act.
We will move on to question number 7. And this question, the one-on-one portion, will be between Mr. Redmond and Mr. MacLauchlan. It has been described as our most valuable export, our youth. Each year, thousands of young men and women pack their bags and head for the riches of Alberta. What will you do, if elected Premier, to try to stem the tide and create opportunities back home here on Prince Edward Island so our young men and women do not have to leave the province? As we said, the one-on-one is between Mr. Redmond and Mr. MacLauchlan.
Wayne, this is at the heart of our platform and at the heart of our vision for the future of Prince Edward Island. We absolutely have to focus on this. We have had large numbers of people, especially in the last period, who've gone abroad. Now, that is something that we have to address, but let's not pretend that we are without success stories here. We have created 7,000 jobs in the past 10 years in this province, 5,900 of them. 5,900 of them are full-time. Then you say, where are they at? Let me tell you, there are 3,000 jobs in the new economy. And not only are there 3,000 jobs in the new economy, in the aerospace sector about 1,200, between 750 and 800 in the biosciences, and a very robust information and communications technology group, and we've recently identified a further cluster in marine technologies, and these are all great jobs. They're year-round, they're for young people starting families with professional credentials, and that we're just at a point now where we continue to build on that and grow on it and expand and do well and bring our people home, and there's probably never been a better time to do it given the downturn in the oil sector out west, and that's a top priority for our government, and we've actually undertaken to create a department of workforce and advanced learning.
Mr. Redmond.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful that we're talking about job creation, 7,000 jobs. It sounds fantastic, but they never ever talk about those wages. They never talk about poverty wages as this government is encouraged. We made two presentations to the Employment Standards Board, and we talked about creating a livable wage strategy in Prince Edward Island. We also talked about basic income guarantee. We talked about lifting people out of poverty in this province. If you don't want our children to leave this province, Mr. MacLauchlan, make sure they have a livable wage strategy.
The jobs I've been talking about are much higher than the minimum wage, let me assure you.
Yeah.
And let me make two other points. The minimum wage has increased 3 times in the past 30 months, and it to increase again on the 1st of July. And in fact, there are workers in this province who, for the first time, are seeing wages above the minimum wage because of the forces of the market, notably in the lobster processing industry, where the plants are paying people an additional $2 this year. So let's not say we're not making headway.
Which is still a poverty wage, correct? $15 is where you need to be. So everything below that is a poverty wage, and that's what you're encouraging, okay? The other part is we have to use our skills program, our EDA program, not as patronage tool as the Liberals do. We need to make sure that our businesses have the opportunity to use those money and those opportunities successfully. We need to focus on our small businesses. We need to focus on our farmers and our fishers. We did that when we said we were going to feed all the children in this province. Farmers, fishers, berry producers, apple orchards, help grow our economy and create jobs here on Prince Edward Island.
I'm just going to mention this. I was at a fish processing operation in Georgetown the other day where the wages are going up 23% this year. So let's not pretend that everything's broken.
The debate is now open between all 4 leaders.
A poverty wage.
Mr. Lantz.
I really think the heart of this question is, what is the role of government in job creation? And we've seen in the past so many grandiose projects to bring hundreds of jobs to Prince Edward Island that have ultimately failed. But it doesn't stop government from taking credit for successes in the private sector when often government deserves no credit. But I will go, regardless, I will go anywhere, anytime to attract jobs and investment to Prince Edward Island. But the heart of the matter is that the private sector must lead the continued growth in Prince Edward Island. And much of what Wade just talked about is the success of the private sector in Prince Edward Island. You travel this province, you get to see some very interesting things that are happening. So the role of government is for us to continue to create a foundation on which the private sector can thrive. And we need to look at very innovative tax strategies to attract investment and jobs here. It needs to be a place that people want to come and create employment. And we need to stop being so fixated on jobs as a measurement. We need to create wealth. With wealth, the jobs will follow, the good-paying jobs. And, we are fully committed to supporting the private sector in initiatives like the Island Advance Initiative, but we've also proposed some modest measures. We know that, like Mike said, small business is important. We've proposed a micro-lending program for small businesses to get off the ground. Our film and digital media tax credit program has the potential to create an entire industry and allow themselves to prove themselves here on Prince Edward Island. And we'll also have a $50 million community infrastructure fund to replace aging infrastructure all across Prince Edward Island.
Jump in, gentlemen.
When we're talking about creating jobs here on Prince Edward Island, all governments, of course, promise they're going to create jobs. Very few of them ever do a really good job of it. But here on Prince Edward Island, we can't just think about the quantity, the number of jobs we're creating. We also have to think about the quality of those jobs and the stability of those jobs. All too often, we'll throw money at people who promise to come here and create 50 jobs, 100 jobs in whatever venture they have. They'll stay as long as they get the tax credits, and then they disappear, and those jobs disappear along with it. What we need to build here is a sustainably prosperous economy. And you do that by playing with the cards you're dealt. Perhaps an unfortunate metaphor, given that the previous finance minister wanted to make us the e-gaming capital of the world. Hardly the sort of stable economic development that a Green government would like to bring to Prince Edward Island. But the cards we're dealt here are that we have a tremendous opportunity to create jobs in the green energy sector, the fastest growing sector of the global economy. Of course, we've done well in wind power, but we have all of our alternative energy eggs in one basket. We need to diversify that into solar, into biomass, biomass being the use of our forests here. If we were to sustainably manage our forests, to thin our forests, use the products that we get from our forests, we create jobs, we reduce our dependence on imported oil, which is like money sucking out of our economy every time a tanker arrives here. We provide jobs, we use a product which is here, and it's just a win-win all round. So in agriculture, in forestry, in green energy, in high-tech, my goodness, we should have real high-speed internet all over Prince Edward Island. It's a real detractor to getting people back into our rural communities. If we want to revitalize our rural communities and attract people back there, so many innovators these days don't require to be in downtown Toronto. They can set up their businesses anywhere in the world, but there's a big barrier here, and it's the fact that we have really bad high-speed internet anytime you go outside the big centers. So there's all kinds of opportunities that we could create stable, quality jobs here in Prince Edward Island, but it will require a government with vision.
I have another minute and a half. Mr. Redmond and then Mr. MacLauchlan.
Well, I think a couple of the gentlemen here touched on it, and we need to value our workforce that we have as well. Last night we had the pleasure to go to the teachers' debate, and this government, in their track record, they gave the teachers a 1% pay increase while inflation rose 2%. In the meantime, that same government gave themselves a 4% raise. So who are we actually valuing in our industry, right? So this is something we need to examine. And those 800 teachers that showed up, they are not happy campers, and they have every right to distrust this government. Thank you.
30 seconds for Mr. MacLauchlan.
I've traveled this province from west to east, and you can find in the fishery in Tignish, and in integrated engineering in Pools Corner, and in small and big manufacturing in between, and all kinds of other sectors where there are year-round jobs, where there's growing economy, where in fact Prince Edward Island has exceeded the national profile in terms of our exports over the past 15 years, and we've got a very important industrial and economic base here, and probably the single biggest thing we need is to continue growing and training our workforce. And let me say, because we talked earlier about post-secondary education, in the past 10 years, the part of our workforce, the percentage of our workforce that has post-secondary credentials has increased from 38 to 47%, and that's a very big factor in our future growth.
Thank you all, gentlemen. We're going to stop it there. In an effort to conserve a bit of time, the next question is going to be 5 minutes open only, so no one-on-one. Prince Edward Island residents continue to pay some of the highest tax rates in this country. The island's basic tax exemption, the level of income exempt from taxes, is at $7,708. It is the lowest rate in the country, and it's not indexed to inflation. What would a government led by you do to ease the tax burden on Prince Edward Island voters? And this is open for the next 4.5 minutes. Mr. Redmond up first.
Well, thank you very much. When we committed, obviously, to raising the personal tax exemptions from $7,800 to $10,000 and attaching it to the CPI. So I'm quite proud of our party's platform on that issue. And what this government has done with HST and taxation, and not to mention that they raised fees in 2012 from licenses and registrations another $7 million, they've taxed those individuals who are the most poor. It's a shameful statistic, and again, it's something that needs to be addressed. But let's talk about what the heart of the matter is. A fair taxation system is not in place in Prince Edward Island, and this government's track record is taxing people in poverty. And I would really love to hear both the Tory and the Liberal leaders say the word poverty. 11 debates, and I cannot get you guys to say that poverty exists in Prince Edward Island.
Let's hear from both of them then. Go ahead, gentlemen.
The basic exemption, as proposed by the Liberals at least, Mike, I can't speak for your numbers, but what we're offering is far greater reduction of the tax burden for the taxpayers of Prince Edward Island, and that is we're going to remove the provincial portion of the HST from your electricity bill. That is about $140 average per household, even more if you heat with electricity. We just think it's fair, broad-based, focused tax relief for everyone in Prince Edward Island. I do believe the basic exemption is too low, and we'll work on moving that ever higher as is affordable. But the PCE platform has real tax savings for Prince Edward Islanders, real tax savings right in your pocket. This is a fair measure of relief based on a Liberal promise not to introduce the HST, and so we thought it was a good place to start.
Mr. MacLauchlan?
We've addressed this question in our platform by introducing tax credits for low and moderate income islanders. And that would mean for single people, and for single people even with no children, that they would see a substantial change in the current credit. And in particular for seniors, we're introducing a new credit of $250. And for a single senior person with an income of $17,000, and Mike, if that may well be something that we should call poverty, but let me say we're saying we're addressing low and moderate income, and that person would see his or her income tax payable to the province reduced by $542 annually, with money in their pocket, and it would see 12,000 islanders who would benefit from these tax credits, and 2,000 islanders who would see their tax payable to the province reduced to zero.
Mr. Bevan-Baker.
The Green Party would have as an absolute high priority the goal of every single islander living with dignity, having his or her basic needs met: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, the things that most of us take for granted. But crushing poverty is an incredibly widespread problem here on Prince Edward Island. And it makes no sense to me at all for somebody who is working and living below the poverty line to be paying taxes. You should never pay income tax on income below the poverty line. It just is nonsensical.
30 seconds.
So what we have to do is raise the basic income tax exemption. It's going to cost a lot of money, by the way. But if you put as a priority reducing inequality here on Prince Edward Island and making sure, again, that every islander can live with dignity, then you just do it.
Final comment, Mike Redmond, 15 seconds.
Well, I think we need to discuss the elephant in the room. We had a social services minister who left $5 million on the table. She left people on disabilities paying, could only afford $25 a month for food. It is absolutely inescapable how she could make the comment that she couldn't find any poor people in P.E.I. She obviously was not looking.
In an effort, because that was addressed to the Liberal, I'll give Mr. MacLauchlan 15 seconds and I have to go.
Read our platform. We've got a long list of changes that we're making in the whole social services area, and we're going to put money in the pockets of poor people in this province.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, well, in a moment, we're going to check in to see what you think. Jocelyn Lloyd is standing by at the iDesk for one final check-in. So, Jocelyn, what did they make of it all?
Thanks again, Wayne. Well, we love the comments, and you kept them coming all night, so thanks very much. I was scrolling through them to see if I could find some winners or losers as far as you're concerned in the debate tonight, but I have to say the leaders were pretty well lauded or derided the same across the board. So here's some of the comments we got online at www.theguardian.pe.ca. Islander 1 commented on our main story, very disappointed with how Wade is dancing around answering about PMP. But Judith wrote in, also about Wade MacLauchlan, an honest, hardworking man that knows how to get the job done. Amanda wrote, all parties need to work together, as I believe this election will create a mix of each of the parties. If the Conservatives are just going to fight against everything that the Liberals suggest or state they are only wasting Islanders' time, work together for solutions, she says. Another commenter said, why keep bringing up the past? Wade didn't do it, couldn't have prevented it, it happened, live with it. And Leona said, Rob Lantz is rocking this debate tonight. So there's another view. And I have a couple of tweets about one of our last questions for the leaders, which was about the environment. One tweet noted that Mike and Peter, that's Redmond and Bevan-Baker, illustrate a common position on the environment, no to lifting deepwater well moratorium. And another tweeter said about that question, this is a bad debate question because duh, water. So, I don't know, I think all of the leaders found something to say on that topic, and so did you. And your debate's not over. You can keep sending in your comments to our website at www.theguardian.pe.ca. Tag us on Twitter at PEI Guardian. Find us on Facebook, facebook.com/PEI Guardian. Back to you, Wayne.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. And a reminder that live election night results begin on that website, www.theguardian.pe.ca, 7 o'clock on Monday night. Please join us. We're your team to trust on election night. Well, gentlemen, it has been an entertaining and informative, we hope, past 90 minutes. Mr. Bevan-Baker, Mr. Lantz, Mr. MacLauchlan, Mr. Redmond, thank you all for being with us this evening. And a special thank you to you watching at home and our live studio audience. This has been Decision 15, the Leaders' Debate, live from the University of Prince Edward Island. Thanks for spending your time with us. Good night, and remember, on Monday, get out and vote.